Hey guys, what's happening? So in this video I want to talk a bit about the post-credit scene of Black Panther. So if you still haven't seen the film yet, first I want to let you know you are in that minority and you need to either go see it ASAP or just don't be on the internet until you do. Because we've come to that point where it's been pretty much 2 weeks, closing on 2 weeks. And even though I personally don't get into the details of films unless I have a video that's titled spoilers, and in that case I'll break it down like an Alka-Seltzer tablet. But aside from that, I'm not going to go on in each video talking about every single part of what happened throughout the film. But you also got to realize that we live in a world where if you wait 3 weeks to a month, and I'm including international with domestic, because we all live together in this web, the World Wide Web I mean. And you're definitely gonna scroll on Instagram and see a quote, or you're gonna open up Twitter and see a retweet. Like we're at the place where that's gonna happen. And I'm not talking about people uploading like bootleg footage of the movie. Like, first of all, anybody who does that, you whack for that. But I mean, when a movie does this well and is this big, people are gonna talk. So with that being said, not only do I want to talk about White Wolf and the Dogs of War and break down who the White Wolf is and who the Dogs of War are, but I also want to talk about the post-credit scene and what it may mean for that, plus a specific quote from Killmonger during the film. So with that being said, first things first, who is the White Wolf in the comics? So now, Hunter is a Caucasian male who was adopted by King T'Chaka after a plane crash where both of his parents were killed, and King T'Chaka took him in as his own son. And he treated him very much like royalty. He lived with the king, and he had access to most things that any child would have being a son of the king. But a lot of Wakandans were suspicious of him, one because he's white, and they didn't really understand why he was living there growing up with the king. But with Hunter genuinely loving his father T'Challa and loving Wakanda, he did everything in his power to express that. And even with all his efforts, it didn't really win people over. And on top of that, some years later, T'Challa's born, and that's when it really hit Hunter that no matter what he does to try to prove himself or how much he loves his father and this nation, that when it's all said and done, T'Challa would inherit everything that a true son would. And it made him a bit jealous, to say the least. And all these things mixed up together kind of build up this resentment in his heart for T'Challa and a yearning to be accepted really by the people of Wakanda where he grew up. And so in the comics, what's much different than the films, at least in this aspect, T'Chaka was killed by Claw when T'Challa was much younger. And before T'Chaka had passed, there were some things that he had did differently that T'Challa wasn't aware of. And a lot of those things also we gotta take it with a grain of salt. Because before King T'Chaka had passed, he had placed Hunter in charge of the Hatut Zeraze. And I've heard that pronounced a number of ways, Hatut Zeraze or just Hatut Zeraze. Do correct me in the comments if you know the correct pronunciation, because I know those are coming. But don't just be down there like, well, it's da-da-da-da, and you really don't know. Because even though it's spelled certain ways, it can still throw you off. But either way, that translates into Dogs of War. And these Dogs of War are Wakanda's secret police. And when Hunter was assigned to be their chieftain, that's when he became the White Wolf. And now all of this so far, T'Challa's aware of. And when T'Challa became king in the comics, he disbanded the Dogs of War because their tactics were very violent and brutal. They would torture during interrogations, and T'Challa didn't believe in any of that. So T'Challa disbanded them and said, we're not going to operate in that fashion. But after T'Challa disbanded them, they left Wakanda and started working as mercenaries. And now the reason why I say to take this kind of with a grain of salt, because a lot of Hunter's background we get from word of mouth from Hunter. And although we know majority of it to be true because it's confirmed through the dialogue between him and Black Panther, but it also comes at us with a twist, because Hunter tells T'Challa that their father T'Chaka wanted Hunter to do pretty much what he couldn't do in public. He wanted him to do that in private. So when it really came down to getting your hands dirty, rather than Black Panther and the Dora Milaje being involved, the White Wolf and the Dogs of War would do the dirty work. And so years later when they cross paths again in the US, Hunter tries to explain this to T'Challa, and at this point T'Challa's just like, I don't care. Insert Civil War clip. But no, really, T'Challa's like, I'm king now and this is how I choose to run my nation. So either you can get with it or just keep it pushing. And at this point in Christopher Priest's run of Black Panther, and this was like in your late 90s, early 2000s, and it depicted a time in T'Challa's life where he's traveling to the US much more frequently. And at this particular time, T'Challa had just demanded sanctions against the US, which was more so viewed by the press and the majority of the world as an act of war. And this is where Hunter pops back up, because he's like, look, you just declared war on the mightiest nation on the planet. Somebody's gonna try and assassinate you. And it's here that he kind of gave this faux, genuine, let me help you, let me fill in the role that your father had intended for me to be for the Black Panther, or for the king of Wakanda. But it wasn't really genuine. and T'Challa saw right through that. And even though he allowed Hunter and the Dogs of War to fulfill their original position, at least for a brief moment, T'Challa could still read through his tone the jealousy and the hatred. All of that was still there, boiling up just under the surface. And so what T'Challa ended up doing a while later, once they got to safety and got back on the ship, he ended up setting a trap for Hunter and his men just to get them out of the way for a brief while. And T'Challa really didn't have a choice, because as much as T'Challa would tell Hunter, sure, we can do this, but we got to do it my way, Hunter would constantly imply that we got to respond with force. These guys are coming at you with bullets, we got to come back the same way. So T'Challa really had no choice but to disable him and his men, really just to keep them from going on another killing spree. And I want to say it was like a few issues later where Hunter had came back after Christopher Priest's Black Panther issue number 9, is around issue number 12. But when Hunter came back, he was like, look, okay, enough with the fake smiles. This face-off between you and me was a long time coming. Pretty much telling T'Challa that it's really inevitable that they become enemies. And that's really in a nutshell your who is the White Wolf and who is the Dogs of War as far as in the comics. And he's appeared other times as well outside of this encounter, but I mainly wanted to give you guys an example of who he is for 2 reasons. Well, a few reasons actually. The first reason is because there are a few people who believe his character does exist in the MCU outside of the post-credit scene with Bucky Barnes. And personally, I don't necessarily agree with that, because if that were true, then the children in that post-credit scene, they wouldn't have referred to Bucky as the White Wolf. Or if there truly was a White Wolf who was actually out there with this type of reputation that left recently after the death of T'Chaka, I just believe that Shuri would have quickly corrected the kids. Because if that were the case, dude is a hostile and he's not welcome in Wakanda. But secondly, I also wanted to talk about these guys because there was a particular scene where Killmonger had mentioned that Wakanda has war dogs in every nation, ready to strike. And at this particular time, he wasn't talking about spies, he said war dogs. And I could be reading into it a little too much, but to me, it sounds like he's referring to the Dogs of War, more specifically, Wakanda's secret police. And I say that because in the film, they talk about spies and he could have just said spies, but he doesn't mention this until a place in the film where he's learned more about Wakanda's secrets. And with him making that statement and then later on the post-credit comes and these little kids are calling Bucky the White Wolf, it kind of just made me lean into that lane a little bit harder, like, okay, well maybe that is something. And so as for talking about Bucky, my thoughts on where they're going to take him in the MCU, I truly believe that they're done using him as an antagonist for any kind of plot line. Sure, he may take on the name White Wolf, he may even get a suit, but if they go this route, it's going to be vastly different from the character in the comics. At least that's what I believe. And even though later on White Wolf was an ally for Casper Cole, who stood in as the Black Panther for a while, they may have T'Challa and Bucky give some nods to that rendition, but at the end of the day, it just wouldn't make sense to have Bucky come from a place to where he once again is the bad guy. And I really say that because it took too much to get him here. And with Shuri and the MCU removing everything that Hydra had put in Bucky's mind and all the things that Bucky has done already coming up to Infinity War, it just really wouldn't make any sense and you'd really just consider him a lost cause. And I just highly doubt that they're setting up his character for that. But that's it for this one, guys. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. If you enjoyed the video and you learned something new, smash the like button. And if you're new to this channel altogether, be sure to subscribe so you can catch the spills every week. And we'll do it again on the next one. Alright, later.